All right, so we will get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here. So my name is Wallace, and I'm an educator here at the Discovery Center. So I'm very happy to have Sydney Rollins here with us tonight. This is actually Sydney's third Superstellar Friday with us. So just happy to have her continuing to come back. Sydney is the project manager of the STEM-MoBILE, which, as you can see, is up there. So you're going to be learning more about that tonight. And also PhD student in the integrative biology program at UNH. And she's going to be talking all about biofabrication and, again, the STEM-MoBILE. So, pass it on to you now.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you guys for having me again. I always like coming here. So yeah, I'll be talking about biofabrication, stem cells, robots, and ghostly hearts. So we're going to hit all those things, and then also what the STEM-MoBILE actually is. So I'll start with a little bit about me. As Wallace said, I'm a PhD student in integrative bio, which means I'm going to be doing biology research and integrating it with education, specifically science education for K through 12, but really just educating everybody. As you can see from all these pictures, I really like teaching people about science, and that's why I keep coming back here. It's kind of my favorite thing is when I get to tell people about the science that's going on, not only in my lab, but in New Hampshire, and kind of spread the awareness there. So that's what I'll be doing through my PhD. I just started that this year. And then I'm also the project manager of the STEM-MoBILE, which initially we thought would be more like I would make write curriculum and lesson plans and then like go out and teach kids. But now the reality of grant funded initiatives, it's been more like find a step van and learn how to take care of them and kind of do everything start to finish. So I've learned a lot. We're not quite at the curriculum point yet, but we are getting there. So the STEM-MoBILE, I want to give you a little bit about the background and the funding. So the New Hampshire Biofabrication Cluster, a couple years ago, this group of companies got together, and representatives from these 7 coalition partners, so UNH and Southern New Hampshire University, Army, I will talk about a lot, not the Army, but Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, which was started by Dean Kamen and is in Manchester. And then the city of Manchester, the airport, the Southern New Hampshire Planning Committee, and Manchester Transit Authority formed this coalition to apply for a Build Back Better Regional Challenge grant, and surprise, they won. So they received $44 million from the federal government to kind of, they call establish this biofabrication cluster. So the idea is to promote biofabrication and allow Southern New Hampshire to become, they're calling it the Regen Valley of the world. It's like Silicon Valley, but for regenerative medicine. And the reason for that is because there is a ton of cutting edge, groundbreaking research happening right in Manchester and in the surrounding towns. And most people don't know about it. And not only that, but as the research grows, we're going to need people to work in the research. And people can't work in it if they don't know about it. So the STEM-MoBILE is one of the initiatives. We get a tiny chunk of that $44 million to start this mobile education lab to go around the state, specifically to rural and underserved communities, but really everywhere in New Hampshire, to teach people about biofabrication and the opportunities to get involved if they are so interested. So this is what the STEM-MoBILE is going to look like, roughly. This is an early mock-up, and we have the others like in draft right now. But as you can see, it's a quite large vehicle. It's actually the same vehicle that they use for food trucks, and it's 18 feet in the body itself. Instead of serving food, it's going to be serving up science out this little window here. So the window up there is going to have a tray, like a table that folds out to do science demos to people. And it will have a lab on the inside as well, so people can walk through and see the cool science happening, see some demos, do some hands-on experiences. And it will go to schools and museums and everywhere to kind of bring biofabrication around. So as I mentioned, this research is happening right in Manchester. The research involves robots, hearts, organs, 3D printers, and we want to bring it to all of New Hampshire and really tell people what's going on. So we're going to target schools, homeschool groups, science fairs, community events, just everywhere in New Hampshire. If you think you might want the STEM-MoBILE, just email me and I'll probably come. Because it's all supposed to be free, and it's supposed to just be as much education as we can get out there about biofabrication.
What grade levels is that?
All of them. All of them. Yep. So I want to talk a little bit about what is biofabrication. I've said that word a couple times now. Basically, biofabrication is the merging of biology, engineering, manufacturing, and automation. So we'll talk a little bit about each of how those concepts kind of tie in, but those are the main concepts that are part of biofabrication. And biofabrication technically means the creation of new tissues or organs for living systems. There's a couple different branches of biofabrication that you might hear of. So there's tissue engineering and there's regenerative medicine, which I've already mentioned. They're pretty similar. There's a couple details that are a little bit different, but they have the same overall goal. So tissue engineering specifically is referring to combining engineering and life sciences to make biological substitutes, and that's to restore tissue or organ function. So these are substitutes for the living tissue that are in your body. Regenerative medicine focuses on replacing or regenerating those cells themselves. So rather than putting in some kind of replacement to help support what's going on in your body, they're going to regrow you a new organ and give you that one. So a little bit of a semantic difference, but I wanted to point that out in case you hear these words out and about. They all are part of biofabrication. So the companies that I mentioned are right in Southern New Hampshire are doing this research. There's Army through their Biofab USA branch. United Therapeutics, they focus on lungs, so lung diseases and lung transplants. Pro Therapeutics focuses on knee and hip replacements. Epibone focuses on other bone replacements. So they're working on jaw bones right now and like parts of skulls. Rockwell Automation is the company that kind of ties all the automation pieces in and tries to make this all scalable. Advanced Solution Life Sciences makes 6-axis robots that can do things instead of they do things more sterilely than a human would and more precisely. Organomet Bio is the company making ghostly hearts that we'll talk about. The bioassembly bot, or the BAB as they call it, is the robot that Advanced Solution Life Sciences makes, and they sell them separately. And then they also work with PBS Biotech, who makes bioreactors that we'll talk about. And then finally, NextFlex is a company I always like to point out because it's the kind of tissue engineering side where they make flexible devices that can be implanted into a body, and they might be like they have some like tech in there, so like a flexible pacemaker, for example. There's tons of other companies doing this stuff too. These are the ones that are very central New Hampshire oriented. So the applications for this crazy sci-fi stuff are really myriad. So burns and traumatic injury, and that includes bone, skin, muscle, all of it. Type 1 diabetes, heart failure and valve disease, urinary incontinence, Parkinson's and other neurological diseases, vision loss, blood manufacturing, stem cells not from embryos, so a little less ethically difficult there, where we can take cells from an adult consenting human and transform them into stem cells that can then be used as any cells, and a lot more. So I want to dive into most of these and give you examples of how biofabrication is helping solve these problems. So first, for traumatic injury and burns, this device here is a handheld 3D bioprinter where you load actual patient cells and what they call a scaffold, this one is called gel matrix, into it, and then they print it physically onto wherever you're missing the muscle. And if you treat it correctly and give it the right nutrients, it grows into your own muscle tissue again, and it heals that muscle. And this was actually done on a patient. He was involved in an explosion and it damaged his arm, and he couldn't move or feel his arm at all. And then they used this technology on him and he's complete normal function of his arm now. So this is like crazy. It's actually happening right now. They can also make these matrices or scaffolds outside of directly onto you. So they kind of prepare it first and then they implant it in and it will integrate with the muscle that's currently there. And for burns, for especially large burns that cover a lot of the body, instead of doing a traditional skin graft where you have to take a large piece of skin and put it somewhere else, they can take a tiny skin graft, separate out the cells and multiply them a little bit, and then they spray them on to your burn, and it's your own skin cells. And they give them this kind of artificial vascularization, so they give them all the nutrients from your blood, and it grows into your own skin. So this is for really people that have more than 20% of burns on their body, but it could be for anybody as it gets further along. The company EpiBone that I mentioned, they're working on pieces of skull. So basically, if you had an injury to your skull, they would use a CT scan to get an exact image and measurements of that piece that was missing. And then they would print a scaffold using a 3D bioprinter out of like a biocompatible material called a bioink. And they print it into that shape. And then they take your cells, they make them into stem cells, and then they put them on the bone and they convince them to turn into bone cells. And then they start rebuilding your bone on that scaffold. At that point, they put it into your skull, and your own bone integrates all the vascularization and all the nerves. So all the blood vessels and nerves kind of grow into that scaffold. And over time, the scaffold breaks down, and you're just left with your bone as if it never happened. Yeah. For diabetes, type 1 diabetes is where your body doesn't produce insulin. So what they're doing for that is they take donor islet cells from somebody. So the islet cells are the parts of the pancreas that produce the insulin normally. So they'll take islet cells from a person who's producing it normally and put them into one of these types of capsules. So they can be nano capsules all the way up to 3-dimensional 3D printed capsules. And they implant them somewhere in your body and they produce insulin for you, just like your pancreas would if it was working. So they can either be from a donor or some people are working on trying to engineer your own ones to convince them to make insulin so that you would have your own cells. For heart valve disease, the valves in the heart are there to separate the chambers and keep the blood from going back up through your veins when it's supposed to be going out into your body. And over time, if you have a heart valve deformity or disease, it can cause you to go into congestive heart failure later in life and significantly shorten life expectancy. So people are working on 3D printing heart valves. So these have been 3D printed out of a flexible biomaterial. And they would be custom made for the person as well, the exact size and shape that you would need for your heart, and then they would put that in. They're also working on making, they 3D printed a mold for them, and then they can make the heart valve out of a more flexible, softer material by putting it into the mold. For people that are too advanced and you're in heart failure to the point where they need a heart transplant, that's where Organomet Bio comes in with the ghostly hearts. And basically what they do is they take a pig heart and they take all the pig cells away, and what's left are just proteins. So the cells are what your body would recognize and reject. That's why you have to have a match when you get a donor, is because the cells on there have all these markers and your body doesn't recognize them, and so it fights it. But it's not going to fight the proteins nearly as much. There are a couple markers on there that that the body isn't too happy with sometimes, but that's much easier to deal with than the whole heart. So they take the pig heart, because it's approximately the right size and shape, and they remove all of the cells, and then it looks white. This is going to be a real pig heart on the screen, just to let you know. So there's the initial heart, and then they decellularize it. And the white there is actually the same heart, just with all the cells gone and all the proteins are left. So that's called the extracellular matrix. And the cells naturally make that around them. It's kind of their like scaffold that they live in. And when you wash them away, the proteins are still left there. And those aren't living, but you can keep them, you know, you have to preserve them. They would break down eventually, but Then they can take human stem cells, put them back on the heart, and then they can, it's very complicated, but over time, over about 6 to 8 weeks, they can grow it into your own heart again. So they do it kind of in stages. First, they do the vascularization and they kind of pump blood through it. And then they put your stem cells in and convince them to turn into heart muscle. And then they convince them to beat together. And at first they all just kind of beat crazily, but then they eventually will beat together. And then they kind of get them used to blood pressure. And so at the end, the heart is fully functional. And it's made of your own cells, so your body would not reject it. They actually had one that they got beating, and they kept it beating for 60 days in a chamber that they made. They completely decelled, recelled, had it beating. Did you have a question?
So my question was, you just answered it in a way. How many of these things are still experimental or actual prototype or are actually being used in, people like the muscular ones being used, you said?
Yep.
Maybe you can just tell us what stage each of these are at.
Yeah,
They're
sure.
all different.
Yeah, so I don't know all of the details.
Yeah.
I can kind of go back a little bit. So for the muscle one that's being used, the skin regrowth is called spray-on skin. That's also being used. The epibone is getting there. They're in the scale up phase right now. So they're growing a whole bunch of jaw bones in these like bioreactors all lined up next to each other. The islet cells for the diabetes, I don't think it's to clinical trials yet, but it's getting there. The heart valves have been used in people. And then the ghost heart is not in people, but they did transplant one into a baboon. So, yeah. And then the other approach, so you could take something that's already the shape of a heart, or they could 3D print it. 3D printing is a lot more difficult in this case, because there are like nanostructures that are really important to the way that your heart functions. And the heart especially, they say it's non-redundant. So basically the liver is like a whole bunch of cells that do the same thing. The kidney, for the most part, a bunch of cells that do the same thing. The heart, every part of it has a function and it all needs to work in order to work right. So they need to make sure everything is printed exactly correctly. And that requires a lot of precision, the right materials, and that it's all vascularized and has like nerves in it, and that it is electrically stimulated. So they have printed this one. This one was made out of human tissue, and it's the size of like a rat heart, but they wanted to start small. And this one they did get to beat as well, but then they preserved it in resin. So for urinary incontinence, it's a little less glamorous, but it's still important. For women especially, who when they sneeze, especially after giving birth, will be familiar with this form of incontinence. This is a 3D printed kind of support that they would surgically put on the bottom of your bladder, and that would support your bladder and prevent that incontinence from happening. And then this is a real bladder that they made. So there actually was somebody that had, he was born with spina bifida and went into kidney failure by age 10. And they told him that he was going to have to be on dialysis forever, or he could try this experimental thing where they made him a new bladder. And so they decided to try that because he wanted to be an active kid. And they actually 3D printed him a bladder and seeded his own cells onto it and then put it into his body. And now he wrestles on his high school team. So that is actually happening. And that's crazy. Parkinson's is still, I think, at the theoretical stage. So they haven't quite done this yet, but we're doing all this other stuff. So why not tackle everything, you know? So Parkinson's is caused by the substantia nigra, which is a part of your brain on the inside, not producing enough dopamine. So what they've thought is we can take some cells from the patient or from a donor or both, combine them, grow them up in a bioreactor, and then kind of make a new substantia nigra or put them back into yours and then put that into your brain, and then you'll make dopamine again. The reason you can't just like take dopamine is because it can't get through the blood-brain barrier. So you need to have something directly in the brain making the dopamine. And then if they figured this out, they could apply it to other neurological diseases as well. I mentioned the blood manufacturing. That one I don't have like a special slide about, but instead of having to get blood donations and keep them all stored and have them expire, people would just be able to make blood as they needed it for patients and kind of keep a stock of blood because they could just make the cells that make the blood and then keep the blood from it. And then the stem cells, that's where all the stem cells that they use for the most part come from. And we actually do it at UNH. It's pretty standard at this point. You can take any cells from an adult. They usually do like a fat sample, but they can also do like skin, like the inside of your cheek. And then you give them a whole bunch of different factors and you basically regress them back into stem cells. And then at that point, those stem cells can become any cell in your body. And then you give those the right factors and they become those. It's not easy, but my classmates have done it, so. All right, so we talked about all of those different applications and kind of where they are at. All of them are going to need to be scaled up because it's great when you can do it for one person, but the goal is to be able to do this for everybody. So there's no more need for a transplant list for anything. Everybody can just have a personalized organ on order whenever you need it. A new joint, whatever, would just be made for you as you needed it. So these little flasks are what we typically culture cells in, mammalian cells. They're called T flasks. I don't know why. And this one here is the scale. It fits about 75 milliliters of liquid. And so the cells are on the bottom. And like, that's a lot of cells, but nowhere near enough to make a heart, right? So then you can stack 3 of them on top of each other. That's great. You can even do this one where there's one opening, but there's a bunch of layers and all of those have cells, but we're gonna need more. And this still requires human interaction every day. Cells are very needy. You have to change their food every single day. So these are the scale-up solutions, bioreactors. So I've mentioned bioreactors a little bit. The basic goal of a bioreactor is to mimic the inside of the human body. So they're gonna grow up cells and multiply them by providing them the right temperature. So 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. They're gonna provide them the right pressure, the right oxygen and dissolved oxygen content, the right carbon dioxide. Some of them need room air that just comes in, the right food and nutrients, the right growth factors. The pH is very important. They're all very sensitive to pH. So there's a ton of things that need to be monitored and provided to these cells. And when you have these flasks, that's all done manually. So you need to, the reason it's pink is because it has a pH indicator. You need to see the color and make sure it's the right pH. And if it's not, change out the food. Every day or every other day, depending on the type of cell, you need to change out the media. You need to put it in a specific, very expensive incubator that has the right oxygen and carbon dioxide. And if you take it out for too long, then you're stressing the cells. And you need to make sure that the incubator is at the right temperature. And again, every time you take it out, you're stressing the cells. So these bioreactors keep everything enclosed and they provide all those conditions for the cells without needing you to touch it or interact with it or it to come out of that in any way. So the one on the left here has 4 chambers that are about 1 liter, and each of those would be full of cells. They have paddles in the bottom that spin and keep the cells suspended, because if they all fell to the bottom, they would make like a tumor basically. And then the inside cells would die. So they keep them all suspended so that they have access to everything in the media. And these are hooked up to machines, which is where the automation comes in, that constantly monitor all of those things and then give feedback to keep it in the right parameters without the need for a human at all. So as long as you can get the cells in there without contaminating them, they're good to go until you have as many as you want. Then you take them out and then you do it again. This one is for cells that are a little bit more fragile. So this is a very large bag, probably holds about 2 or 3 liters. And it's just a plastic bag on this big wave machine, probably like the size of this table. And it just will kind of gently wave back and forth to kind of keep the cells suspended and moving, but without stressing them like a paddle would. So it does the same thing. It has monitors for all of those things and it adjusts everything for you. But it's just like a different form of it. They actually have bioreactors that are up to 2,000 liters now. So these massive vats that are just full of cells. Mostly what they use them for is growing bacteria and yeast that make proteins that they then harvest for medicine. But they also are using them for mammalian cells. And that's the size that you would need to grow enough to make a heart. It's tens of millions of cells. Yes. I mentioned automating a little bit and how the bioreactors keep track of everything and make sure that the cells stay healthy. But we can also automate more things. So this robot here is an example of what's called liquid handling. And so that is basically a pipetting robot. And the main benefits are that it's completely enclosed and sterile. So it has a HEPA filter inside, so nothing can make it contaminated. And it has these pipetter arms that kind of can move different distances, can pipette whatever liquids or amounts they want, and then transfer it to different things. So these actually we had at UNH as well. They were helping us run our COVID testing lab way back. So these are becoming more standard as well. But the idea, again, you can keep everything sterile, everything's really precise, and it saves human labor so the humans can do other things. We also have more serious robots. So I mentioned the 6-axis robot, and the main function for that is to be able to, for example, inject the cells into the heart. So they actually used the BAB when they made the ghost heart, the one that was beating, by first using it to inject vascularization, and then they used it to inject the cells for the muscle in all of the different chambers where they needed to go. And then they used it to stimulate it with electricity. So that way you're not contaminating the heart because it's in a really fragile state, and any bacteria introduced to it are just going to kill it. Same with all of these cells. If you introduce bacteria, the whole thing is dead. So they really need to keep it sterile. So the less that a human has to open it and interact with it, the better you're going to be. And that's where the robots come in. The robots just stay in their sterile enclosure. They're completely sterile all the time. They've never seen a bacterium, and they can keep everything going how it has to be without humans at all, which is crazy. So Army has kind of the culmination of this scale up and automate is kind of what Army is aiming to do. So they work with all those companies that I mentioned earlier to help them move from, okay, we had this idea, we got it to work once, to we need to produce this for thousands of people. So their first kind of mission was to make the tissue foundry, and they go by these 4 kind of tenets of the tissue foundry. So they want it to be scalable. Again, we need to scale up. They want it to be modular. So depending on the specific usage of the person or the company that needed it, they want each component to be able to trade out with other components. And maybe you need more cells, so you're going to double up that component. So they want it to all be kind of modular. Completely automated. So no humans have to interact with it beyond putting the cells in it first and then taking out the end product. And again, completely enclosed, so there's no risk of contamination. So this is the tissue foundry. They kind of have it, all these wires up here that are colorful are for the benefit of people that want to look at it. Otherwise it would just be all hidden. But they want to show kind of the pathways and all the wires there. And the way that it works is you take a tiny vial about this big of cells and you put it in that little cylinder within the blue cylinder, and then you walk away. 45 days later, a ligament is done. It's insane. You put in a little bit of cells, it takes them out, it rehydrates them, it keeps them completely growing, it changes out their media and scales them up over time. And then it puts them on this device that differentiates them into ligament cells. And it's actually kind of folds and bends and makes them grow into this bridge, and then changes and they grow a bridge again. So this is an ACL, and it actually will grow ACLs in 45 days. And it would be from your own tissue. Yeah. So they want to be able to do this with everything. They want to take hearts and be able to do this, kidneys, bones, everything.
Where is that located?
Manchester, New Hampshire.
Nice.
Mhm.
Are they doing that now? Because I think my nephew got that done. Something was grown and put in his knee, like.
Quite
months later.
possibly. Yeah. They might be. Probably not at the actual tissue foundry. They probably had humans. But yeah, it's definitely happening very quickly. So as you can imagine, all of this happening right in Manchester and in southern New Hampshire is requiring people to do it, at least to set up the automation, so then they can walk away and start building other stuff. And there's a lot of jobs that are going to be coming available over the next few years. So first of all, scientists, so life scientists, everywhere from high school diploma, you can go to an apprenticeship, to PhDs are going to be needed. All types of engineers, manufacturing, electrical, automation, robotics, all the engineers that exist, probably chemical too. Equipment techs, so if you don't want to go to college at all, you just want to graduate high school and then go work in this field, just go take care of the equipment. Geneticists, to make sure that everything's matching with different people and to see how much you can reuse from person to person. Transportation specialists, because all of these hearts and organs and bones need to be brought to the person at the hospital that needs to receive them. And that's a part of what the grant is going for too, is to create what they're calling the vertiport, which is an electric helicopter, basically, that will transport these organs from the Myriad in Manchester to the hospitals where the patients need them. So we're gonna need people to like fly the helicopter and make sure that the organs get to the right places quickly. Data scientists, make sure everything's all following the FDA regulations and that everything makes sense. Bioethicists, because we're getting into some sci-fi stuff here. We need to make sure that everything is ethical and that all of our donors are consenting and all that good stuff. And then, of course, educators to teach people about it. So they have a whole department at Army as well that is just their workforce education department, and they work with kids and provide them opportunities for internships and workshops and all kinds of stuff like that. So don't forget, I am from the STEM-MoBILE. All of this biofabrication education is going to be brought all over the state completely for free. The STEM-MoBILE is grant funded, so all we do take sponsorships. We are not charging any schools or any groups any money to do anything. That's the point of the grant. It's obviously mobile, it's right in the name. It can go anywhere that you can't get to a lab. So specifically like rural New Hampshire, we're gonna go way up into Coos County. For the people that can't just like take a bus down to Manchester for the afternoon, we're gonna take it to you. And it's really for everyone. So we call it K through gray. So kindergartners to not kindergartners, teachers, parents, community members, science museum employees, college faculty and staff, any student, anyone that wants to learn about this. I had someone ask me if we'd come to their block party. I was like, probably. So anywhere that you want the STEM-MoBILE will go for free. What's not to love about that? So here's a QR code to our website. And this is my email that goes directly to me, but it's fancy. So if you have any connections or you want to tell other people about it, we're really hoping it will be ready to hit the streets and visit schools and visit communities this summer. So are there any questions?
So the UNH part, so you're talking UNH Manchester then? Not
Yeah.
Manchester.
Yeah.
So your whole, so what do you have that's within the college walls that pertains to all of these companies that are out there doing it?
Do you know about our Biotechnology Innovation Center? Seemed like a pointed question. So our 6th floor was recently remodeled into our Biotech Innovation Center. And I mentioned that Army was kind of the scale up process. So they call themselves startup labs for these companies to kind of get going. UNH's 6th floor, the Biotechnology Innovation Center, is the step before that. So somebody has an idea, they've kind of proven it at their whatever lab, but they need access to more expensive equipment to really like prove their theory. So they can come rent space from our university, and they get access to all of our state-of-the-art equipment without having to buy it themselves just to use it when they're not ready for that yet. And then the idea is they can move down to Army and get scaled up. So we have that space for them, and our students also use the space. So it's really great for our biotech bachelor's and master's students. They can get up there and use the equipment that they're going to be using at the jobs that are literally down the street from them. So we are very much integrated with that, and we're also part of an application for another $44 million federal grant called Tech Hubs. Manchester was recently designated as a tech hub within the country. So that kind of, there's a lot going on around biofabrication. Yes,
Do you have a newsletter or periodic?
not yet, but I will.
Okay.
Yeah. I usually have a mailing list, but if you send me an email and just let me know that you're interested in that, I will be having that at some point.
At the very beginning, you were showing some type of a pen type of an object
Mhm.
that was putting cells onto somebody's skin.
Yeah.
And I think you said you fill it with, yeah, muscle. So you fill it with cells. Where do those cells come from?
From that person.
From that person.
Yep.
And where exactly from the person cells?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it depends how fast you want it to be able to happen. You could certainly take any cells, make them into stem cells, and then make them into muscle cells. Or you could just take a smaller piece of a healthy muscle and kind of multiply them. So they're already muscle, you're skipping a few steps. But it is that person's cells.
Okay.
Mhm.
So getting, following that one up, you gave the example of a guy who was, in combat and lost chunks of muscle exposure. And so you were able to do it. What about someone who had an injury 20 years ago? And are you still able to do the same thing in that case?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I think it would depend. It would be a case by case. I think it would depend on how the body had kind of closed that off.
Right,
Um,
because it's healed and it's all
Yeah.
stored, but.
right. I think in some ways you might be able to. When like your bone heals wrong, they have to like re-break it and then you can heal it right. It might be like that situation where they have to kind of scrape away the muscle and then reprint it. But I think eventually, yeah. The only thing they can't do yet is if you get an amputation and they can't reattach it, they can't grow you a new hand yet. We're not there yet.
Just wondering about like nerves, regenerating, damaged nerves.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything like that?
I think that's kind of part of it. Like the body will naturally kind of revascularize and reinnervate those areas if they're healthy otherwise. So I mean, that guy couldn't feel or move his arm and now he can. So that has to do with nerves, which is pretty crazy.
Have any of the hospitals partnered with you at all? And also, how does SNU get involved? I mean, I understand that how UNH is involved, but how is SNU involved?
So the hospitals partnered with like the STEM-MoBILE or with these
With
companies.
the Regenerative Tissue Center.
I'm sure they have. I'm not part of their kind of business side, so I don't know about that exactly. In terms of SNU, they are actually I kind of skipped a step of how like we're funded. So there's the Biofab cluster, and then within that there's the Work and Learn program. And we are part of the Work and Learn program, and SNU is like the main awardee for that program. So SNU kind of said that they would head all of the efforts because they had more resources than UNH Manchester. And so they are the main awardee, and then we're a sub awardee at UNH Manchester. So we're doing the STEM-MoBILE and this other program. If you've heard of Tech Camp in Durham, there's like science camps for kids. They're doing a Manchester version of Tech Camp. And then SNU is also working with multi-language learners to support their integration into biofabrication. And I think there's a couple other initiatives that SNU is kind of the lead on in terms of Work and Learn, but I don't know exactly. Does that answer your question? Mhm.
STEM-MoBILE for New Hampshire only?
New Hampshire and the surrounding areas.
Border?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that's fine. The grant is mainly to support Southern New Hampshire, but we're not going to say no unless it's like ridiculously far. Are there any questions on them? Okay. Anything else? Cool. Okay, yeah, so I'll leave that up. Oh, sorry, did you have
This
something?
is happening all over the world.
Yes,
Yeah.
but Manchester's kind of on the front edge of it, believe it or not. Dean Kamen has put a lot of money into this, and so has the government at this point. And I think some of the breakthroughs that are happening here are only happening in Manchester. especially the ghost heart. That is specifically somebody in Manchester. My friends actually helped on it, so. pretty cool.
So when you mentioned that a lot of help is needed, is there a place to go to apply to be part of the program?
Army has their apprenticeship and their job openings. If you look up Army and then you follow this logo, there's a bunch on there. Their logo here. I think right now we're in the stage of like, we're gonna need jobs. There certainly are jobs, but I don't have application information.
So we would have to contact each one of those separately to find out what opportunities were there.
Interesting that you say that, because that is what the Tech Hub's proposal is to make a common place for all of these things. Yes. So they are working on that.
So we do have a question now from online. So Adam asks, why can't you just 3D print the muscle out of food and put some cells onto the food?
Food, interesting. Probably the short answer, because food is not biocompatible. So if you just put food inside your body would reject it. So it has to be compatible with your body in a way that your body will accept it. And then it has to break down in a way that's not harmful to your body, so, because your body's gonna replace it over time. And then you won't have the scaffold forever. Okay. So again, QR code, there's my email. My email is also on the website. The website is updated with events that I'll be at. And it will be very apparent on the website when the STEM-MoBILE is ready. It's gonna be a big deal. So right now it's just kind of information about what it will be, but there will be so many pictures when it's ready. So if you wanna just keep checking that out to see when we're gonna be around. And thank you guys.
And you'll be around a little bit for
Yeah.
questions if somebody wants.
Mhm.
Good presentation. Sydney will be around to answer some questions at 8 o'clock. We'll have a planetarium theater. So if you want